The house had always sounded different when it was empty, like it was holding its breath, every floorboard too aware of its own creak, every shadow stretching longer than it should. Rain pressed against the windows in thin, insistent lines, blurring the world outside into a soft, restless gray. Elena stood in the hallway, barefoot on cold tile, listening to the storm like it might speak back to her if she waited long enough. She hadn't planned on letting anyone in that night. Her father was gone. The house was hers, temporarily, and she had wrapped herself in that quiet ownership like a shield. But then came the knock, hesitant, spaced, careful. Not demanding. Not casual. A knock that carried history. When she opened the door, the porch light revealed them in fragments. 3 men, older than her memories but still carrying familiar outlines. Her father's friends. The past standing in the rain, asking silently for shelter. Julian stood slightly behind the others, shoulders damp, hair darker with rain, eyes steady but unreadable. He looked at her like he always had, like he was aware of something fragile he wasn't allowed to touch. The years had changed him, sharpened him, but that restraint remained, quiet and heavy. Storms worse than expected, one of them said, voice low, apologetic. Power's out on the main road. Elena hesitated, fingers tightening on the doorframe. She felt the weight of the choice before she made it, the way certain moments bend inward before they snap into memory. Then she stepped aside. I allowed all 3 of Dad's friends in, she would think later, as if naming it might help her understand why the air shifted the second they crossed the threshold. The door closed behind them with a soft, final sound. The house seemed to notice. They moved carefully, as if afraid to disturb something sleeping. Jackets were hung, shoes left near the door. Polite conversation filled the space in thin layers, never quite settling. Elena watched Julian from across the room, the way his gaze drifted to familiar objects, the old framed photos, the staircase, the corner where the light always dimmed first. He remembered this place. That was the problem. The power flickered, then surrendered completely. Darkness pooled in the corners. Someone lit a lantern, its glow warm and unsteady, turning faces into softer versions of themselves. Shadows leaned closer. The storm pressed nearer, louder now, like it wanted to be included. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. These men had known her as a child, as potential, as someone unfinished. Now they stood in her space, seeing who she had become, and it felt like being looked at through glass that might crack. Julian's eyes met hers across the room. Just for a second. Something passed between them, recognition, restraint, a question neither of them asked. He looked away first. They settled into the living room, conversation drifting to safe topics. Roads. Weather. Her father's trip. Elena answered when spoken to, but her attention kept slipping, drawn back to the quiet gravity of Julian's presence. He sat with his hands loosely clasped, posture relaxed but controlled, like he was holding himself still on purpose. At one point, the lantern dimmed, and Julian rose without comment to adjust it. Their fingers brushed briefly when he handed it back. The contact was accidental, fleeting, but Elena felt it like a held breath finally released. Her pulse jumped, uninvited, traitorous. She wondered if he felt it too. The storm grew louder. Thunder rolled, deep and resonant, vibrating through the walls. One of the men joked about old times, about how Elena used to draw chalk circles in the attic and claim they were secret places where no one could get hurt. The words landed heavier than intended. Julian's head lifted. Slowly. His gaze found hers again, sharper this time, edged with something like realization. I remember that, he said quietly. Elena swallowed. She hadn't thought anyone else did. Silence stretched, thick and fragile. The storm raged on outside, but inside, something else had begun to stir, something unspoken, something waiting. And somewhere above them, in the dark attic, the secret circle still existed, patient as memory, waiting to be stepped into again. The storm settled into a steady rhythm, no longer explosive but persistent, as if it had decided to stay a while. Rain traced the windows in uneven paths, each line catching the lantern's glow before slipping into darkness. The house felt smaller now, not claustrophobic, but intimate, like the walls had leaned in to listen. Conversation thinned again after the mention of the chalk circles. It wasn't intentional. No one reacted outwardly. But something subtle shifted, like a note held too long. Elena felt it in the way Julian's attention lingered, no longer drifting, no longer pretending neutrality. She excused herself under the pretense of checking the breaker, though she already knew the power wouldn't return soon. The hallway swallowed her footsteps. The farther she moved from the living room, the quieter everything became, until all she could hear was the storm and her own breath. Halfway up the stairs, she paused. She hadn't meant to go to the attic. She told herself that firmly. But her feet carried her upward anyway, guided by memory more than intention. Each step creaked in recognition. The door at the top waited, unchanged, paint chipped at the handle from years of opening and closing with careless hands. She pushed it open. The attic smelled the same, dust and old wood and something faintly sweet, like a memory trying not to fade. The lantern's light barely reached the far corners, but she didn't need it. She knew where everything was. Where she had hidden herself when the world felt too loud. Where she had drawn her boundaries in chalk and believed in their magic. The circle was still there. Faded, broken in places, but unmistakable. A thin white ring on the floor, incomplete yet stubborn, refusing to disappear entirely. Elena stood at its edge, heart tightening. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had left inside it. Footsteps sounded on the stairs behind her. She didn't turn right away. She knew who it would be. Julian stopped a few steps inside the attic, careful not to intrude further. The lantern light caught his profile, softer than downstairs, shadowed by hesitation. He didn't speak at first. Neither did she. The silence between them felt deliberate, almost sacred. I didn't mean to follow, he said finally, voice low, respectful. I just remembered. Elena nodded, eyes fixed on the circle. Most people forgot. I didn't, he said. I never did. He stepped closer, slowly, as if approaching something fragile. His gaze dropped to the chalk, then lifted to her face. There was something unguarded in his expression now, a crack in the careful composure she had always known. You used to say nothing bad could cross it, he continued. That if you stood inside, you were safe. She smiled faintly. I was a kid. You were serious, he replied. You always were. The words lingered. Not accusatory. Not nostalgic. Just honest. Elena stepped into the circle. The movement was small, but it carried weight. Julian noticed immediately. His breath caught, subtle but real. He stayed where he was, just outside the chalk line, as if unsure whether he was allowed to cross it. The storm thundered again, closer this time. The attic trembled faintly. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly exposed, like stepping into the circle had stripped away more than she intended. Why did you remember? She asked softly. After all this time. Julian hesitated. His jaw tightened. He looked down, then back at her, eyes dark with something unspoken. Because I paid attention, he said. Because some things stay with you, whether you want them to or not. She felt the truth of that settle between them. Downstairs, voices rose briefly, laughter, movement, but they sounded distant, like they belonged to another world. Up here, time felt suspended, stretched thin between past and present. I should go back, Elena said, though she didn't move. Julian nodded, but he didn't step away either. Yeah, he said. Me too. Neither of them did. His hand lifted, then stopped, hovering uncertainly near the edge of the circle. He didn't touch her. He didn't cross the line. But the intention was there, clear and restrained, and it made her chest ache. I never wanted to step where I wasn't invited, he said quietly. Even back then. She looked at him fully now. Really looked. The careful distance. The way he always showed up but never stayed too close. The way he watched her grow from the edges, never interfering, never claiming space that wasn't offered. You could have, she whispered. I would have let you. The words surprised them both. Julian's eyes widened slightly, then softened. Emotion flickered across his face, relief, regret, longing, too fast to name but too real to ignore. He took a breath, steadying himself, as if standing on the edge of something that could change everything. Before either of them could say more, a voice called from downstairs. Elena, everything okay? The moment fractured. She stepped out of the circle, the chalk breaking beneath her foot with a faint, final sound. Julian lowered his hand. The space between them filled again, heavier now, charged with what had almost been said. Yeah, she called back, voice steady despite everything. We're coming. As they turned toward the stairs, Julian glanced once more at the broken circle on the floor. Something in his expression shifted, not loss, but resolve. Some boundaries, he seemed to realize, were meant to be crossed. The storm began to loosen its grip sometime after midnight, its anger softening into a low, distant murmur, like something exhausted by its own intensity. The lantern downstairs flickered less now. Shadows steadied. The house exhaled. One by one, the men gathered their things. Polite goodbyes were exchanged. Gratitude offered. Coats shrugged on. The world outside waited, damp and reflective, streets gleaming under fractured light. Elena stood near the doorway, arms folded loosely, watching the moment thin toward its end. She felt strangely unanchored, like she had stepped out of time and wasn't entirely sure how to step back in. When the first door opened, a rush of cold air swept through the room, carrying the scent of rain and asphalt. Julian lingered. He always did. The others said their farewells and stepped out into the night, their voices fading down the porch steps. The door closed again with a quiet click, leaving only two people and the echo of everything that hadn't been said. Silence settled, not awkward, not empty. Heavy. Intentional. Elena turned toward the kitchen, more out of instinct than direction. Julian followed, stopping a few feet away, careful as ever. The lantern cast long shadows across the counter, stretching their outlines toward each other without letting them touch. You okay? He asked. She nodded, then hesitated. I don't know, she said honestly. I think something shifted. Julian's jaw tightened, just slightly. Yeah, he said. I felt that too. The words hung between them, fragile and exposed. Outside, the rain slowed further, as if listening. Elena leaned back against the counter, grounding herself. You never crossed the circle, she said softly. Even tonight. I wanted to, he admitted. The confession came without drama, stripped of defense. More than once. Her breath caught. She looked at him, really looked, at the restraint etched into his posture, the way he held himself like someone who had spent years choosing distance over desire. Why didn't you? She asked. Julian looked down at his hands, then back up, eyes dark with memory. Because I was your father's friend. Because you were younger. Because it wasn't my place. His voice lowered. Because I didn't trust myself to want just a little. The air seemed to tighten. I told myself it was respect, he continued. And maybe part of it was. But part of it was fear. Fear that if I stepped in, I wouldn't know how to step back out. Elena felt something inside her chest give way, not break, but open. The realization was dizzying. All those years she had wondered if she had imagined it, if the quiet intensity had been one-sided, misplaced. You made me feel invisible, she whispered, not accusing. Just true. Julian flinched. I know. He stepped closer, the space between them narrowing to something charged and deliberate. And I hated myself for that. She swallowed. You don't get to decide what I can handle. I know that now, he said. I didn't then. Silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, less like distance, more like anticipation. Julian's hand lifted, stopping just short of touching her wrist, as if asking permission without words. Elena reached out first. Her fingers wrapped around his, warm and steady, grounding. The contact sent a quiet shock through both of them, not explosive, not reckless. Something deeper. Earned. Julian's breath stuttered. Elena, I'm not a kid anymore, she said softly. And I'm tired of pretending I don't feel things just because they're complicated. His thumb brushed lightly against her knuckles, reverent. I never stopped seeing you, he said. I just never let myself be seen. The confession landed between them, heavy and undeniable. Years of restraint collapsed inward, reshaping the space they stood in. Elena felt it, the shift. The way the world subtly reoriented around a truth finally spoken. Come upstairs, she said. Not an invitation charged with promise. Not a demand. Just a direction. Toward understanding. Toward the place where everything began. They climbed the stairs together, slower this time. The attic door opened to quiet and shadow and the faint outline of chalk on wood. The broken circle waited, incomplete, vulnerable. Elena stepped inside it again. Julian followed. The chalk line crumbled further beneath his shoe, erased not by force but by choice. He stopped in front of her, close enough now that the air between them felt electric with restraint. This changes things, he said. Yes, she agreed. That's the point. He lifted his hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face, the touch feather-light, reverent. His forehead rested briefly against hers, not quite a kiss, not yet. The tension coiled tight, exquisite. I don't know what happens next, he whispered. Elena closed her eyes, breathing him in. Neither do I. Downstairs, a door somewhere in the house shifted with the settling wood. The night waited. The future hovered, uncertain and dangerously close. Julian pulled back just enough to look at her, eyes searching. Are you sure? She met his gaze, steady, unflinching. Ask me again tomorrow, she said softly. Tonight, I just want you to stay. He hesitated, just a second, then nodded. The lantern flickered once more, casting their shadows together on the attic wall, blurred and overlapping. Outside, the storm finally ended. Inside, something had only just begun.